Morning everyone and welcome to the third meeting of the Welfare Reform Committee in 2013. Can I remind everyone to switch off their mobile phones and other electronic devices so that we don't get disturbed. Before we hear from our UC witnesses this morning, we have one item to consider, and that's whether to take item 3 on our agenda in private. It's a discussion on our approach to the scrutiny of the regulations on the passported benefits arising from the Welfare Reform Further Provision Scotland Act 2012. So do members agree that we take that in private?
Agree.
Okay, thank you very much. And that brings us to agenda item 2, which is our evidence-taking session with members of the public who have got in touch with the committee through the Your Say initiative, which we set up to help hear the concerns of people affected by the welfare reforms and changes to benefits. All 3 testimonies which we'll hear in a moment give a good snapshot of some of the issues from the many other submissions we received through this initiative. I think we'll just go through each of the witnesses in turn, and I think we'll all agree just to do it from nearer to me to further away if that's acceptable. So we'll hear this morning from Marlene Hepburn, then Leslie McMurtry and Ian McGahey. Okay, so I'll pass you over to Marlene and you can give us your statement. Thanks very much.
Right. My name is Marlene Hepburn. I have multiple sclerosis and have recently been reassessed for the new benefit, replacing incapacity benefit. I was retired from my job as senior teacher on grounds of ill health 5 years ago. My experience of the new work capability assessment was dreadful. The first appointment was cancelled at the moment I turned up for the appointment. A second appointment was arranged, adding to my already heightened stress level. I found the actual assessment was stressful and was devastated to be told that as a result of the assessment, I no longer qualified for the new benefit. I would be moved on to job seeker allowance, and I have a copy of my assessor's report, which in my mind places huge emphasis on how well I looked and how well turned out I was. I look well because I self-manage my condition well, with the help of medication, injections 3 times a week of interferon, and I also try to lead a healthy lifestyle, being proactive in my approach to the disease. My fear at this precise moment in time is that this whole experience will trigger a relapse. The emotional stress has been enormous and has had a detrimental impact on my health. I am in the process of requesting a reconsideration stroke appeal, further adding to my worries. Financial worries were added today with a letter from the DWP confirming cessation of my incapacity benefit. I appreciate the benefit system needs to be reformed, but not to the detriment of genuine claimants. Following my communication with regard to my experience with Atos, I thought I would update you on the latest turn of events. On Saturday, I received a response to a submission on my behalf for a reconsideration of the decision, a 71-page response, which said there was no new evidence to overturn the decision and I could now go to appeal. This was Saturday, and since then my level of anxiety reached an almost unbearable level. I had just had my regular check-up with my MS specialist nurse on the Friday, and she had advised me to keep my stress levels down, as it is a well-established fact stress has a damaging impact on MS. I am trying to control my stress, but I have now reached my limit and do feel extremely vulnerable and anxious as to what my MS will do now. Welfare reform is a good idea in practice, but when it has such a negative impact on the vulnerable, then somebody needs to listen and action needs to be taken to protect people like me. I worked as a teacher for many years and was retired through ill health. MS is incurable. There is no magic miracle cure. My latest sick line from my GP sent to the DWP just days before my latest bombshell was for a year. His opinion apparently counts for nothing.
Thanks very much. Leslie.
Good morning, members. My name's Leslie McMurtry and I'm the principal carer for my husband, Charles. My husband was retired from work 5 years ago, having been employed as a social worker since 1973. He was never off sick until he was retired due to permanent incapacity following a mental breakdown due to workload and family problems. He also has some physical problems. He has asthma, arthritis in his knee, spine and neck, as well as high blood pressure and swelling in his ankles. He has limited rotation in his wrist and swelling in his fingers, as well as pain in his wrist following a fall in the garden, where he lost concentration and fell over a garden pot. Mentally, he is very fragile. He's virtually reclusive, only going out accompanied by me. He's socially withdrawn too. When family visits, he removes himself from the scene and goes upstairs to his study. He finds organising himself very difficult, and I prompt him regularly when I'm at home. He loses items regularly, and I often find that what he is looking for, he can't see them. Things like his glasses and letters. He regularly drops his medication, and I often find pills on the floor. Just last night, I found 2 pills on the floor. And when I asked him if he has taken the correct dose, he's unable to tell me. When I'm not around, as I work 5 days, he sits in his dressing gown, unwashed, and undertakes no tasks around the house. He was able to claim incapacity benefit, and he has had his health reviewed by the DWP annually since first complaining incapacity benefit. Each time he scored sufficient points. That was until he was assessed in June 2012 for ESA. He had undergone 3 assessments prior to the June assessment. The first 2 were carried out by DWP doctors. These 2 assessments were conducted in an atmosphere where my husband was able to discuss his illnesses and how they affect him without sticking rigidly to a set question and answer framework. The doctor clarified my husband's answers before recording them and was sensitive to my husband, which I felt helped a great deal as he gets confused and loses concentration during longer discussions. He clearly was experienced in handling patients with mental health problems. These 2 assessments fully recorded my husband's medical conditions, and when we sent for a copy, we agreed fully with the assessment. The assessment before June 2012 was carried out by filling in a form, and he had received notification that he had scored sufficient points and didn't need to attend the medical. His health over the last year has deteriorated, and he is presently waiting to see a psychiatrist. And I'll just add in now, he has now seen a psychiatrist, and he's on 2 afternoons of inpatient treatment at our local hospital. But he was told at that time the waiting list would mean that he had to wait 12 weeks minimum. And from this fact alone, his mental health has deteriorated since his last fit for work assessment. He also has a broken wrist. He broke his wrist last summer and has a metal plate fitted, and now he has limited mobility using his hand due to swelling and pain. He cannot tie his shoelaces and button shirts due to his wrist and swelling in his fingers. On the day of the assessment, he had to take additional medication, 8 milligrams of diazepam, before he was able to leave the house. He took some before entering the medical, 4 milligrams, as we had to wait for over an hour as there had been a mix-up in the booking, which was commented on as a positive in the final report. And he had additional medication on arriving home of 4 milligrams. There was no opportunity to reveal this at the medical, as the structure did not allow for any deviation from the set questions. Indeed, when he said that he was having a bad day, this was recorded but not explored or discussed. The assessment itself was conducted in a manner geared to clients I felt with physical disabilities, with only about 5 minutes of the 60 minutes being devoted to his mental health. None of his answers were recorded accurately. The report was a cut and paste job of small parts of answers which were geared to showing him as having no difficulties, i.e. when he was asked if he walked to the local shop, he answered that he'd only attempted this twice in the past 3 months, and he had found the ordeal harrowing. This was recorded as he was able to walk to the local shop. There was no follow-up questioning of why he found this harrowing, which could have illuminated his mental health difficulties. I also felt that by this time we had been there for nearly an hour, but in fact nearly 2.5, including the long wait before going in. And my husband was struggling mentally to cope, but was putting a brave face on it and was desperate to get out of the room. I also felt the nurse needed us away, as she had other appointments. She also made a comment about my husband's skin tone, saying he had a good tan, which I took to mean that she thought he spent his time out of doors enjoying the sunshine. Well, last June was a particularly wet month, and my husband's highly florid skin tone is a result of steroid medication he takes for his asthma. I was hurt by this thoughtless comment, but did not respond, as my husband was clearly feeling the pressure of the assessment and would not have coped if I had questioned the nurse about it. Needless to say, when we received the result, he was fit for work. It was as expected, as it was obvious from the medical examination and the subtle negative feelings projected by the nurse. We went to the Citizens' Advice for advice re an appeal, and were advised to see our GP and get a sick note and appeal the decision. We subsequently visited our GP, who refused to give my husband a sick note, as he said if he had been assessed as fit for work by ATOS, then he must be. After a lengthy discussion, he gave my husband a sick note with fit for part-time work on it. We took this to the DWP and were told there were no facilities for this. You were either fit for work or not. He was told he had all his contributions paid, so there was no point in him claiming ESA, as he had a pension. Furthermore, they would not help him find part-time work, as they were too busy finding work for others who needed full-time employment who were claiming ESA. This is supposed to be an improvement on the benefits system. Well, words fail me.
Thanks very much, Leslie. Ian.
Good morning. My name is Ian McGahey. I'm a veterinary surgeon who's been unable to work for the last 9 years. I received incapacity benefit at the higher rate for 8 years. My difficulty started when I was sent for an ATOS assessment. I suffer from fibromyalgia and severe allergic illnesses. I travelled into central Glasgow by bus and train and then had an hour's wait for my appointment. By the time I was seen, I was suffering severe pain and discomfort. My memory is not totally reliable due to my state, but I think the interviewer offered on 3 or 4 occasions to stop the process due to my obvious distress. I stated I'd be just the same at any subsequent interview, so I would rather proceed and reduce the overall amount of pain that I would suffer. Towards the end of the session, she stated that she would not conduct the physical examination, as this would cause me even more distress. She then inquired how I was to return home. When I stated that I'd have to use the train and bus, she very kindly organised for a taxi to take me to my door due to this obvious serious suffering I was experiencing. Given all these facts, I was totally incredulous to be told by a telephone conversation from a DWP employee that ATOS had assigned a score of 0. This caused me enormous distress, as it effectively labelled me as untruthful, and it completely impugned my honour. When I informed the person from the DWP of the circumstances of the interview outlined above, he just repeated over again, "So you say," as if I had invented the whole matter. I asked him to seek proof from ATOS as to the veracity of my statement, given his scepticism. My incredulity was further increased when I was informed verbally that my written submission had been assessed and that the DWP had allocated a score of 66. During the conversation, I was eventually informed that they would reassess my application if I could organise written statements from medical practitioners. Reports were arranged from my occupational therapist, consultant physician and my GP. All this information was just enough for the DWP employee to award the minimum 15 points for me to qualify for the work-related ESA. However, this only lasts for 1 year and then stops. I find living a major difficulty and work would be an impossibility. Given this, I had to appeal the decision and will have to attend a tribunal in order to receive the support group status. The attendant stress that this process has caused over the last 11 months has caused a real worsening of my condition. I have suffered multiple infections due to stress-reduced immunity, and I've been placed on antidepressants. While waiting for the appeal, I was phoned by an employee of the DWP to be told that he would not have even placed me in the work-related group, essentially implying that my appeal was useless. The following day, after a prolonged wait, I collapsed in the doctor's waiting room and required a 999 ambulance call-out. The diagnosis was a severe flare-up of my condition caused by stress. I believe that the call from the DWP was a major contributing factor. My condition continued to deteriorate in that I have begun to use a wheelchair intermittently. After waiting 7 months for the appeal, and only 2 weeks after the last call from the DWP, I received another call from the same operator to say that he had received a letter from my consultant psychiatrist and had phoned her personally. As a result of this phone call, he was placing me in the support group ESA, and that I wouldn't be bothered until December 2014. But even then, I would only have to be required to resubmit the psychiatrist report, and the support group status would be renewed. The following week, I received a letter indicating that I had to attend another ATOS assessment. As you may imagine, I was stunned and extremely upset. I contacted the DWP to be told that this was an error, and they confirmed that I was indeed on the support group. I have subsequently received another letter indicating that I was in the work-related group, and again I had to check that this was another mistake. When asked how I spend my time, I reply that actively trying to maintain my sanity accounts for the majority of my limited reserves of energy. I've tried to present the facts that are hopefully relevant to your inquiry without being too descriptive of the physical and emotional state that I suffer. Even composing this short letter caused stress, which has the consequence of worsening my condition. I will do my best to help with any additional information that you require. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much to you all for your contributions. It must have been difficult for you to have to recount that, but it's absolutely invaluable to us in terms of us getting an understanding of just exactly what you've all had to endure, and hopefully to inform us each time we've taken evidence or heard from individuals. Certainly for me, it's raised more and more questions about this whole process. I'll open it up to members shortly, but just a couple of things that I wanted to ask for clarification, because the picture that I had been given when we met with Atos following our last Hearsay evidence session is not sort of matching up with the information that you've given us this morning. Now, there may be good reasons for that. We'll have to go back to Atos and find out why that's the case. You've all mentioned, or I think certainly you made a point of it, and other people have mentioned, about the allocation of points. Now, Atos went to great lengths to take us through how they compile the information. But I don't remember, and I don't know whether Alex or Kevin were there, they never mentioned them allocating points. Did they tell you that that's what they were going to do, and do you see that when you get the report back in terms of the points?
There's actually descriptors on the web that you can download, and these are the descriptors they use to award the points.
Who's awarding the points, though?
Atos.
What worries me here is that we've been told that Atos do an objective assessment and they pass that on and somebody at the DWP makes the decision. Is it possible that somebody at the DWP is awarding points based on the Atos assessment? Are you suggesting that Atos do that themselves?
My understanding is the report I got was from the doctor that did the assessment, and it said, therefore I got 6 points. That was how disabled I am. I got 6. And she said, as Miss Hepburn could, I awarded no points. So in my mind, it's perfectly clear this is Atos that's awarding the points. So I got 6. And when I got somebody to come and talk me through the report, he got me up to, I think we were up to 16. So...
Before I bring
I
Kevin in.
have the medical report of my husband here, and there are no points on the medical report. But the letter that came from Department of Work and Pensions has my husband was awarded 6 points at the medical, or from the medical evidence, and the form that he submitted. I take it it's some kind of adjudicator that looks at
They call them decision makers.
decision maker.
Yes.
Someone looks at what we have submitted and the medical report. There's no points on the report. I've got the full report, but there is an allocation by this. What did you call it?
Decision maker.
Decision maker.
Yeah, I think we need to get clarity around just
Yes.
who is appointing or allocating these points, because Atos went to great lengths to convince us, if you like, that they had no input into the actual outcome of the decision. They just collect the information and pass it to the DWP. Now, if you're telling us that there are points allocated on the information that they collate, then that's not quite the picture that they created, Kevin.
Convener, again, I mean, it comes as no surprise at this committee to get new information all of the time. But, you know, I think that in terms of our visit to Atos, there was absolutely no mention of that point system. And there were DWP officials there who could have told us that the decision maker did it in that regard. But I would find it very difficult to see how they could come up with a points-based score based on the assessment criteria that we actually seen in that visit. I think it would be extremely difficult. And if such a point system does exist, then I think that we need to get somebody from the DWP in here to explain how that actually works. Because in my mind, Convener, and I don't know about yourself or Alec, I think it would be extremely difficult to base a point system round about the basic questions that there were or the basic information that there was from the questions on the computer screens that we actually saw. So I think that without a doubt, after hearing this evidence, we need the DWP to come in and explain, first of all, what this point system is and how points are allocated. I think it would be extremely difficult for a decision maker to base points on what we've seen because at the end of the day, they were not present at that particular interview.
I think there's a major flaw in the system when it comes to this, but before I come on to members and actually open up to allow them, there was just one other thing that I wanted to clarify, because again, this comes back to the information we obtained when we were speaking to Atos and subsequently have corresponded with Atos. Can you confirm, each of you individually, whether your GP supplied a report along with the initial assessment?
No.
You're all shaking your heads, so none of your GPs...
None of the GPs, not my neurologist or my MS nurse, nobody.
So
Neither
it was
the
purely
psychiatrist.
based on information that either you supplied yourself and the Atos assessment. The GPs made no contribution at the outset. Okay.
Can I ask in that respect, are you aware whether Atos had sought information from your medical teams?
As far as I know, my neurologist has had no contact from Atos and my MS nurse had no contact from Atos.
I asked the GP and he had had no contact.
I don't think Atos have anything to do with the medical representatives.
And yet Atos made it clear to us that they contact the claimant's GP as part of the initial... They told us that they would make a decision on whether to call someone in based on the response they get from their GP at the outset.
I understood I was called in because I'd filled the form in without any advice from anybody. I filled it in truthfully myself, and that was why I was called for a medical, a face-to-face, because I had been completely honest about my condition, and I listed the people they could go and ask, and they didn't ask anybody. They just pulled me in and then put me out.
Right, I'll open it up to the committee. I'll take Vice Convener first and then come to you, Kevin. Jamie?
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to you all for the evidence you've given thus far. As Kevin says, it's very helpful in terms of the work we are undertaking. I've got a question for Marlene Hepburn, and for the public record, I should declare she has no relation. We had a discussion earlier, we might have a distant relation somewhere. Just in terms of the evidence you provided, Marlene, you said you found the actual assessment very stressful, and then you went on to talk about the impact that had on you. But could you quantify it for us? Why was it a stressful process?
Well, the girl came out, introduced herself as Ileana, Dr. Ileana, whoever she was. She took me in to a room, and I had my sister with me who'd come down from Fraserburgh. And she turned and she said, "I see you've brought somebody with you." And she turned to my sister, looked her up and down and went, "Exactly who are you?" Well, a word of warning, you don't do that to my sister. She's an ex-deputy head, not a good ploy. So she said, I'm her sister. So that was okay, we sat down. She then went through the descriptors that, as I say, I didn't even know existed. And then she said, "I need to do a physical examination. I'll need to get you get up on the table." Well, I looked at the table and there were 3 steps up, no handrail. And I thought, right, I've got to get up on there. She's expecting me to get up on there. So I went up the steps. I went up 1 step, 2 steps, turned, sat down, and then swung my legs round, because I knew if I'd climbed the 3rd step, I was away. So that was fine. She got me lying on the table, and then she said to me, I want you to raise your leg. Can you raise your right leg? Which I did, and she went, "Is that the best you can do?" And I said, yes, so I put it down again. And she did the same with the other. She said, "Now, can you tell me, why couldn't you lift your leg any higher?" I said, "Well, it was heavy and it was wobbly." "Yes, but you couldn't lift." I said, "No, I've got MS." "Right." And that was it. And my sister said as well, she's got MS. To come off the table, I had to come down the steps on my bottom, because I thought if I stand up on the top step to come down, I'm away. And she's expecting me to come down, therefore I'll come down. In the report, she said, "Miss Hepburn accessed and left the table unaided." True, but not accurate. And it was things like that where she took no account. Sorry to do this, but I didn't want to do this in public. I have a problem with my bowels.
If you don't want to give any,
No, it's
if
okay.
any of the witnesses are uncomfortable about any personal information, don't
I'll
feel obliged to say
I'll go with
anything.
this bit because it is important. I have a problem with my bowels. Now, she asked questions, and being the typical Scot, I tried to make it less serious than it was. So I said that I wore pads, and the report said she only wears pads. Yeah, but I changed them like maybe 3-4 times a day. Now, that wasn't in the report because it never got that deep. And it was the dismissal of the fact that I had these problems, but they really weren't important. They didn't impact on my life. And as I say, the whole thing, I felt really threatened because it was conducted in very much of, need to get you out. 3/4 of an hour I sat, and that was noted in the report. Miss Hepburn sat for 45 minutes with no apparent sign of discomfort. Now, I was brought up, it was an interview, you go in, you sit down, you sit there till you're finished, and then you leave. So I never thought to say to her, "Excuse me, I'm feeling uncomfortable." I just sat there, did the interview. I wanted to get out. But that went against me because I sat for 45 minutes. The report also stressed that I swim. Yes, I swim. I don't go up and down the pool. I go to the university when it's half length and it's so many metres deep. I only do so many lengths and I come out. I don't up and down. I do my lengths. It might take me 30 minutes, it might take me 45 minutes, it might take me longer. Her report was, Miss Hepburn swims for 45 minutes a week.
So essentially what, I mean, it sounds as though part of it was an attitudinal problem from the individual, but also, and that sounds quite similar to what was on Ms McMurphy's submission in terms of the part about her husband going to the shops. You know, it's a very, you can say something and they'll apply it very literally rather than deal with the nuance. So that was the problem.
And the fact that I keep myself healthy, I follow my health professional's advice. I try to keep myself mobile, because if I don't know what will happen. But also, I am the secretary of the local MS branch, and I type up the minutes. That went against me. Miss Hepburn is the secretary of the local MS branch, and she types up the minutes. She attends meetings. Fair enough. We get a cup of tea and a biscuit. I'll go for a cup of tea and a biscuit. I type the minutes up. I've got computer skills. Yes, but she doesn't see me sitting in front of the computer going, I've lost that cursor again. You can put whatever adjective you want in front of me. And I sit there for ages going, show yourself to me. And I get the minutes, but the minutes are all there. Up the top is, I just have to change the date. I just have to change who's there. It's the same process, matters arising, blah, 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 blah. And it's just the same process. So I do very little new input. It's just the information. And luckily, my chairperson gives me a printed sheet of what's going to happen at the meeting. So I'm simply transferring from there to there. But I have computer skills, therefore I'm employable.
And I also see, and you mentioned, and this isn't the first time we've heard this, that emphasis was placed in the report on how you were turned out. I mean, it sounds to me from what you said, almost would have been better if you'd turned up slovenly and you were totally inactive. Do you think that would have counted more for you?
Miss Hepburn is well turned out, dressed neatly, dressed tidily. And I was with my big sister. She's older than me now. She wouldn't have let me go out the house untidy. And I thought, to say that I look well, yes, I look well because I have lost weight, I exercise, I try to eat healthily, I watch what I do, I don't go overtired, I look this good because I work at it. But when I go home from the Atos thing, that was me done for the day. You know, I said to my sister, you can forget doing anything. But no, I look well, and I present myself well, and I have good eye contact. But I was a teacher, so sorry. Old habits die hard.
Yes, I remember most teachers had good eye contact from the back of their head as well.
Yeah, my kids used to say, you got eyes in the back? I said, yes, that's why I've got longer here, because you can't see them. But no, that there was huge emphasis on that. I look well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Hepburn. I have to say I'm slightly terrified of your sister now after that. Can I turn to Ms. McMurphy? I'm kind of confused by, and clearly you were as well, where you say here that the delay in your appointment was somehow referred to as positive in the report. What do you mean?
What it actually stated was very similar to what you had, that because he didn't walk out and sat waiting for the appointment to go in and have the medical, that was a positive thing. Because if he was, I assume the inference of that is, if he was as poorly and unable to cope, he would have walked out. He would not have sat. But it didn't take account of the amount of medication that he had been taking and took while he was there. It was commented on as a positive.
It seems extraordinary that could be held against someone. You say in your submission as well that the final report was a cut and paste job, and you gave the example referred to earlier about them saying that your husband's answer led them to conclude that he was able to walk to the local shop, whereas he found it very difficult to do so. Do you have other examples?
Absolutely.
That lead you to call it a cut and paste job?
Many examples. I've brought the form along with me. Okay, let's have a look here. Probably does it. A positive, he gets out of bed. And it says, despite pain, but he went into quite a bit about he gets out of bed very late, and one of the reasons is because of his mental health problem. And he finds getting up to face the day very, very difficult. And I prompt him. My break's at 11 o'clock in the morning at work, and I phone home and ask him, are you up? Usually he is up by that time. Sometimes he's not up. And if he's not up, I phone at 1 o'clock at my lunchtime. And I phone then and say, are you up? And he usually is up by that time. But sometimes he's not. And when I get home from work, I haven't yet found him in bed. But I find him every single day sitting with his dressing gown on at that time, at 4:30, 5 o'clock at night, sitting, unwashed, and that's a big problem for me. And it's a big problem for him. So, despite having pain, because he has arthritis in his spine, his neck and his arms, and he's waiting for a knee operation to have a replacement knee, that was seen as a positive, that he actually gets out of bed. Didn't say the time that he gets out of bed, his feeling about having to get up in the morning, all that was talked about, but it was, you know, it was described as a positive part. He has a walk-in shower, was described as a positive thing. We don't have a walk-in shower, so that is an actual inaccurate part. We have a shower over a bath, and we explained the difficulty he had with washing, that if he sits in the bath, he regularly can't get up, and that was particularly with his hand to lever himself up with arthritis in his necks and spine. We explained that in quite some detail, and that he uses a shower, but it's quite difficult because he has to lift his leg over the bath. We don't have a walk-in shower, but it does say he has a walk-in shower. I could go through this whole thing because everything. He drives for 5 minutes to the supermarket and the GP surgery most weeks. He doesn't see the GP most weeks. He sees the GP. Well, in fact, he's been seeing the GP regularly now because since ATOS, the assessment, his mental health has deteriorated and he's now on an inpatient programme. He never drives to the he never goes to the supermarket. I go to the supermarket. And that was explained to them. The thing was totally inaccurate. He watches television most days. He does watch the television most days. And he generally prefers to watch the news. And he watches television for half an hour at a time. And that's accurate. But that was described as a positive.
Did they explain what the relevance might be of him watching television, especially watching the news, might be to his fitness for work?
They didn't explain that, but I think that was to show that he had some concentration, that he could watch the television. But quite regularly, when we're watching the news, because we both really enjoy it, and we actually enjoy watching Parliament and watching all the committees and things like that. And he'll watch the television, and he's away in another little. He goes off into his own little place, and I'll say to him, "Did you hear that?" And he'll go, "What? Did you hear what he said there?" You know, and none of this was explored, but it was taken as positives. And another positive, he has to stand to ease the pain, to allow him to sit for longer periods. And I'm assuming that is so that adjustments could be made to work, that you can stand up and move. He moves his joints, he bends his knees, and he stretches, and he moves round his back, which he does constantly throughout the day. And that was taken as a positive.
Just one final question, if I may convene, and then I'll shut up. Just a question for Ian, in terms of, I was intrigued by your experience where it seems there was a lot of toing and froing with the DWP, and eventually they accept you should be in the support group ESA, but you then got these other letters, and then another letter, or you got a letter saying that you had to be reassessed, and then another letter saying you were on the work. Did they explain how this mistake came around?
The first one, they said it was just unfortunate timing. It wasn't unfortunate timing for them, it was flaming unfortunate timing for me. You know, it was an emotional roller coaster with events. It's just inefficiency and no caring.
I mean, I could see why. I mean, it was clearly unfortunate timing for you in terms of the duress, but I could maybe see how, you know, a letter maybe automatically comes out the first time, but then the second time when you've already been told actually you're on a certain type of ESA, and then you know the letter comes out the other. What was the explanation for that?
Paraphrase Oscar Wilde: to lose one parent's unfortunate, to lose two is carelessness.
I don't think we've ever had Oscar Wilde at this committee before. Thank you. Thank you.
Kevin.
Thank you, Convener. Can I start by asking Ms Hepburn, you mentioned the 71-page response that you received back. I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail about that response. Obviously not go through the entire 71 pages, but, you know, what kind of things did that response actually have in it?
Well, when I got the response, the big envelope dropped in, right? So I opened it up, 71 pages. I put it to the side, and I thought, I can't go through that. 3 o'clock in the morning, couldn't sleep. What do? You read the report. One of the things they said which completely and utterly devastated me was that any reasonable I have dropped foot, which I now wear an ankle brace for, which, as I explained, it doesn't eradicate the problem. The foot will still drop, but it helps to relieve the number of times I do that. And I can't wear it in the house because I can't wear it with slippers. I've got to wear it with shoes with laces. So when I fall in the house, there's one day I fell and took the toenail off. Well, that meant a trip to hospital, etc., etc. But anyway, it said that any reasonable person, implying not me, would use a manual wheelchair on a daily basis to manoeuvre around the house or manoeuvre around wherever I was. I've had MS for 30 years, over 30 years. The only time I go in a wheelchair is when I go on holiday. Big problem, because that's one they're going to get me on. How do I manage to go on holiday? I get the wheelchair at the airport. My sister, well, they push me, or if there's nobody there, my sister pushes me. It meets me when I come off the plane, they wheel me through. But they recommended that any reasonable person would use a wheelchair on a daily basis. That devastated me. I am in the local MS Society. I'm quite proud of the fact I walk into the meetings, I walk out. I hope that gives encouragement to newly diagnosed people who get the diagnosis. They come to the meeting, 3/4 of the people are in wheelchairs. And hey, this one walks in looking good with no wheelchair. I think that's a positive for other MS. I'll not say sufferers because my chairperson will annihilate me. People who've got MS. That they recommended that. That devastated me, completely and utterly devastated me. I thought, what's the point? I'm not in a wheelchair, but hey ho, who needs to worry about being in a wheelchair? I keep my mobility. That's why I swim, I walk, I exercise, I eat healthily. I want to keep out of a wheelchair. That was another thing that the woman said. Have you got stairs in your house? And in the form I had put it was a bungalow, right? And she said, have you got stairs in your house? And my sister from behind me said, the clue's in the word bungalow. And at that point I thought, oh, Kathleen, you've just blown it. But, you know, I don't have stairs in my house. I have one step to get in, one step to get out the back to my patio. It's on the level. I have no stairs. I can still fall in my house. And usually I'm in my bare feet, which is why I took the toenail off. But I now wear an ankle brace. I have to, because it stops the frequency of falling. But it still happens. And when I fall, it's a triple whammy. I take the knee out of my trousers, I wet myself, and I soil myself. So then I have to be assisted to a toilet, which is why I always travel on holiday with my sister in case this happens. And she can tell people that she feels quite heartless because I trip. I lie in the pavement and she stands and watches me, and all these people rush up, as you do, and they're pulling at me, and she'll say, no, no, she's fine, just leave it. And they can see her looking at her thinking, oh, you heartless bosom. But I know that my legs will not support me, so I lie there till I get the power back in my legs. I then have to have something to lean on to get up. And once I'm up, I'm fine. But that's what's in the report, you know.
So you said that you've had MS for 30 years, and from the evidence that you gave, you said that you retired on the grounds of ill health some 5 years ago. So obviously for 25 years of having or being diagnosed with MS, you actually carried on working during that period of time.
As a teacher, it got progressively more difficult because the tiredness, I didn't usually suffer from tiredness, but the tiredness began to be a problem. And when I said to my head teacher, I'm really tired today, she went, we're all tired, it's Christmas time, Marlene. And at that point I went to my doctor and said, look, you know, I need to do something about this. And he actually wrote a very, very strongly worded sick note, which completely blew the whole thing open with the council. It was horrendous. And again, that was stressful. So then I was off on sickness for a year. I couldn't go back to work, and I got granted ill health, retirement in ill health. Now, as I say, MS is incurable. Okay, I am very, very lucky. My MS is controlled by injections, but even the injections can cause problems, because one Christmas I injected myself. It was Christmas. I was up at my sister's. I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and said to Caroline, I have terrific pain in the site I've injected. We had to get to the local hospital, and they discovered I had a cyst. Where I'd put the needle in, I had a bruise, and it got infected, so I had an infection. And it was incredibly painful. So even the injections, I have to watch. I can no longer inject in my left lower. I now have to inject in my arms. I have bruises all over my abdomen. When I go swimming, I hate showers where you all shower together, because I go in there and they'll look, this woman's got puncture marks all over her abdomen. And, you know, they must think, you know, what on earth? And I have problems with that. I have bruising on my legs, on my arms. Well, they're unsightly, but I do that. And because I inject 3 times a week with interferon, I'm in control of my MS, which is a really silly position to be in, because you think, I'm in control of this, and I'm just terrified that I lose control, because the MS can flare up at any time. Yes, it's remittent relapsing, which is, you know, I can have a flare up, I can be fine. I can be fine for ages, and then suddenly the symptom comes back. And that's my fear.
Thank you. Mrs McMurtry, we've heard from Ms Hepburn that she worked for 25 years with MS. In your written evidence, you said that your husband started work as a social worker in 1973. Can you maybe tell us when his illness started and when he actually gave up work?
Yes, his illness actually started round about the year 2000. At that point, we had going into the work part of it, the council reorganised his job, and there had been 3 senior social workers, and the job was amalgamated, and he was put in charge of the whole of Fife Council for community service for offenders. I don't really like to go into too much of that, but the constant pressure of running a service on his own, he found very, very difficult. I don't mind talking about the family problems we had. At that point in time, my father had lung cancer, and my daughter was 16, and she was diagnosed with ME, and she was bedridden for over 6 months. And the combination of the pressure in that year, he was off work. That was his first very critical depressive episode, and he was off work for 6 months. But he got back to work, and he worked quite well for another few years. And then he had another critical episode where work-related problems built up and he couldn't cope. And he was off work for another 6 months. And finally, he was off just before he was medically retired for about 1.5 years. First year, he was in half pay, and then he was in, and then he was medically retired. So he had before that, he had been off with depression and associated. The arthritis had always been there, and the asthma had always been there, but we had always managed it until we couldn't manage it any further, and the council decided that he should be retired on permanent incapacity, and it was with mental health problems.
Okay, thank you. And Mr McGahey, you said that you were a vet. Can I ask how long you actually undertook the job of veterinary surgery?
Well, I qualified in '84. So when I had to stop work, I was a senior partner in my own practice. I was a university lecturer as well, part-time university lecturer. And one of when I stopped work with this one was when one of the clients took my business partner aside and, virtually accused him of being, callous so-and-so and allowing me to be at my work. I think one of the things that's apparent, I think a lot of the general public have this idea of, the chronic ill is, these feckless people that give up and sit about, and don't try. I make massive efforts. I've made massive efforts to try and get better from this. I've got, I wrote out a list of 38 treatments, both medicines and procedures and things that I had tried. I desperately want to get back to my work. I love my work.
That's one of the difficulties that there is about the situation that we have here, whereby from other places we keep hearing we want to help strivers, not skivers. And the system is supposedly set up to deal with the so-called skivers. It's language that I don't particularly like, and I think it's extremely unhelpful. And I think the point that I'm trying to find out from you guys is that even though you've had some troubles in terms of yourselves, Miss Hepburn and Mr McGahey, and in terms of your husband, Mrs McMurtry, there has always been that willingness, that desire to actually carry on and work if that's at all possible.
It isn't, and that's what makes it so particularly offensive. Which makes it so sore, so demoralising with it. And because, we all are trying, our very, very best. But the trouble is that with the DWP and with ATOS, is it penalises the very people that do try, like we turned up smartly dressed. We make an effort. None of us are we don't sit about complaining about our situation. Coming here is difficult for us. I tried to allude it. I tried to make my report factual. It wasn't about the day-to-day emotions of the thing with it, because we try to be positive and we try to get on as best we can, and that is held against you.
One of the things with incapacity benefit, which I don't think is actually available with employment support allowances. Once my husband was on incapacity benefit, there was a part of the programme called supported permitted work. I don't know if you've heard of that. And my husband was very, very keen to try and get some work, and we invested some of our savings in a mobile disco because he loves music, and he was supported by Fife Employability team to gear him up in how to organise himself for that, and I became his roadie and learned how to wire up a disco at 58 years old, and travelled with him all the time, and my daughter helped out as well, setting up this mobile disco. And he was allowed to do that under the benefit of incapacity benefit. He was allowed to do that as long as he didn't work a certain amount of hours a week. He only worked maybe once a month or something if he was lucky, but he got a lot of satisfaction and self-worth out of that. And he only worked through word of mouth. He never advertised. It was people who he knew asked him to come along and do that. But of course, that's all gone because he's now not in receipt of any kind of benefits whatsoever. And Fife Employability are not supporting him any longer as well because, their role with him. So he's basically on the scrap heap now. But he still has another 5 years to go to get his pension.
Can I ask Mr McGahey just one final question, convener, and it's round about fibromyalgia, because I think it's something that a lot of people don't really understand. I wonder if you could maybe describe the chronic pain that sometimes you feel with the illness. I think, from my perspective, knowing a little bit about it, you get an insight, but if you could give a description, I think that would be useful for us.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if I was going in mastermind, my specialist subject would be this, because I can read any medical journal, the medical stuff's easy for me. So I'm genned up to the ceiling in it. It's a neurological condition. People say you're looking grand. I said, well, you should see my neurotransmitters. They're all over the place. But I wake up in the morning in pain, and I go to sleep at night in pain. And if I do anything, I call them stressors, but anything aggravates it. Sitting with a meal, sitting speaking with my friends, concentrating a conversation with my friends for an hour aggravates the symptoms with it, as well as the pain, which is generalised. You can get localised headaches. The other things, you get nausea that builds up, and if you've got a sore head and you're feeling sick, concentrating is very, very difficult on tasks. As I said, I wrote reports. Obviously, it was one of the hardest degrees to get through. 750 words. I think it took me 4 hours. To do that, sitting, looking at the thing with it. And as I say, anything I do exacerbates the symptoms. So I have to make, and as I say, I keep trying to get as much as I can out of life. But for everything I do, I class that as a benefit, but there's a cost for it. So again, with the ATOS assessment, you can walk, 100 yards. I once a week, I go out with a friend with a similar illness, and we go out and we get the fresh air and stuff, and then I come home and I go to my bed, and I don't schedule anything for the next day. I mean, it's normally Monday. If I was coming here, then I would cancel the walk on the Monday, and I have nothing scheduled at all for tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I think you're very brave, and we're very grateful for your evidence today. Thank you, convener.
Annabelle, you wanted to ask a small supplementary before I come to Ian?
Thank you, convener, and thank you as well for coming in, and it really has been very useful for the committee, and I hope anybody watching the proceedings this morning or at some later stage to see exactly what this all means for individual human beings, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. I wanted to ask, it wasn't entirely supplementary to Kevin's, but it was rather, you may be aware that we have sought to have the UK Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Mr Ian Duncan-Smith, come before this committee in a formal session to have a similar exchange and to ask him questions and hopefully obtain answers. But sadly, he has thus far refused to do so. So I would like to ask each of you in turn, what would you like to ask Mr Ian Duncan-Smith?
I would just ask him, where is your heart? And where's your sense? You know, you put me back to work, okay, I'll be there on Monday, I'll be there on Tuesday, might be there on Wednesday, don't know if I'll be there on Thursday, definitely won't be there on Friday. And who's going to employ a woman who can fall over nothing and have to go home and get showered? Just, I feel that they have no idea of reality, of real life living with a disability at all.
Leslie?
Probably for me it would be my husband paid in many years into with the view that if he was old or older, he's 60, so he's not old, keeps telling me, that he would be looked after. And we are now in the position where he is not looked after. In fact, the state, if you like, has contributed to making him in a worse position than he was June last year. And I thought when, I'm a history graduate, when we set up the welfare state, it was to be there for people like my husband who worked really hard, who did his best, and so that in times of need there would be something there, and it's not there. So that's my question for him. There should be something there for these hard-working men and women who have worked and contributed to society, and they're left then with nothing.
Is it Ian?
Yeah,
Would your question be?
I did thought about this before, and my question to him would be, and I'm certain, I know that the UK government ministers didn't phone triage up and say to them, you refer to your clients as LTBs. I don't think they told them specifically to do that, but I'd ask him, why he felt that it was right that he could create the atmosphere where this didn't seem to be such a bad thing. And I would ask him if he had any, it's a stupid question, ask him if he had any guilt or any compassion or any regret about having created the conditions that people that are supposed to be helping them, generate, that kind of disgraceful, offensive.
Well, thank you very much, all three of you, and I sincerely hope that Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith has been listening to you. Thank you, Convener.
Okay. Linda, is a small supplementary. Okay.
Annabelle was similar, but at the end.
Right, Ian.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to try and tease out a couple of themes from the evidence that we've heard, which relate to ongoing concerns, I think, that the committee have got about the way the process is working. And the first is one which seemed to me to be, to a degree, common to Mrs McMurtry's evidence and also Mr McGahey's, which was the capacity of the system to make a fair assessment of mental health problems. You said, Mrs McMurtry, in your evidence that you felt the assessment was almost entirely about your husband's physical health, and I think you said only 5 minutes out of the 60 was devoted to his mental health. And Mr McGahey slightly differently, but it's not, I know it's not a resolution, but progress was made when your consultant psychiatrist was listened to by DWP, and I know there was then further mess-ups about calling you back in, but at least it did seem that there was a point there where actually your psychiatrist's evidence was listened to. And so I really wanted to ask both of you a little more about that, whether you feel that the process, the questions, the structure of the assessment doesn't allow a proper assessment to be made of mental health problems, or if you feel that those who are carrying out the assessments at Atos don't have the expertise or the experience to recognise or understand those problems. And I just wonder which you felt it was. Or maybe I'm missing the mark altogether.
I don't think so. for me as an onlooker, I would have said that the structure of the actual assessment, because he was very slow and took a long time to do the physical part, because he had to do bending and stretching and things like that, and that took quite a bit of time. The amount of time that was left was very short, so therefore it had to be very rushed. But I think my personal view on it was that the nurse herself had certain questions that she needed to get answered, and with someone with mental health problems, it's my view is it's very difficult for them to actually have insight into the difficulties they have, and they take quite a bit of teasing out of what they're saying and clarifying what that is. And there wasn't enough time, but I don't think she would have been skilled enough from what I observed, and things like some of the comments that she made and her manner. When I compare that to one of the doctors who he had, who, you know, made my husband very comfortable.
You made a contrast, quite an interesting contrast, that previously you felt that the DWP process pre-ATOS actually did make a fair assessment.
It did make a fair, and we were very happy with how it went. The doctor was extremely skilled. I don't know who he was, but he was extremely skilled, and within minutes made my husband feel...
That wasn't a doctor that knew your husband, that was a DWP.
It was
I think they were called BAMs or something that DWP appointed.
Yeah, he made him feel relaxed. He, you know, he could talk and clarify, and there was none of that at this. It was just...
It's not impossible to make a fair assessment. It's just not
It
happening
certainly
now,
was
is
much
what you
fairer, in my opinion, the previous way, but this experience was no...
Sure.
Give us an idea, how long ago in the process did your husband go through these DWP assessments?
Right. He went through two, over the past 5 years, he had two face-to-face medicals with a DWP doctor and one written one, and they were all... This was
in the last 5 years?
Within the last 5 years.
Okay, so we're not going back a long time into
no,
the
we're
past?
not.
So.
And certainly the two with the doctor, I was present, and they were excellent.
Yeah, it's paradoxical, but actually I don't actually have many psychological problems or psychiatric ones. It's historical. When I first had chronic fatigue, the only person in my area that was dealing with it happened to be a consultant psychiatrist. And it's been hereditary. I see his occupational therapist who's the best person that helped me for it. What they do is they are very useful in giving me coping strategies. They give me ways of dealing with it, with the physical signs. But I would say with ATOS, they have... My impression is that although they say it's nurses that are doing the assessments and doctors, you could have a secretary doing it, because they're ticking boxes on a preset form. It doesn't take medical skills for them to do it. They ask you, can you walk? And people say yes, and they tick a box, yes. They're not making detailed psychological assessments with them. They're saying, can you get up in the morning? Do you like yourself?
And again, your experience of DWP was rather better than your experience of ATOS. Is that fair? I mean, in the end, DWP did...
They eventually
put you on the support group, didn't you? And
which is all I was asking for.
You also had much higher scores when they assessed your evidence than when ATOS assessed it and assigned you a score of 0, your evidence is. Yeah.
But again, they did it once. I had reports from occupational therapists, GPs. But one of the big problems is that they didn't when it first went in. It was only when there was... again, it was another occupational therapist report. but it was only at the, at the very last junction, when, a week before I was due, and I don't know what the consultant psychiatrist said that changed their mind. And the thing is that, as I said, in that first time when they phoned me up to say I had a 0 score, it was only well into the conversation. I said, well, what am I going to do? And he said, well, and I said, but my occupational therapist will say that. And he said, oh, well, you can maybe get reports from them. I said, I didn't know that. They'd never said anywhere.
Right.
So then I had to start that process.
So it wasn't made clear to you how you could appeal the decision?
No.
That's right.
As I said, I'm a robust, strong character. There's not many people say, would say I was easier, a walkover. But this process, has pushed me to the very edge. And that's the main reason I'm here. If it's doing that to somebody, I've got superb family support, I've got great friends, because the medics are very good with me. I know who to access. I'm the person that should have it the easiest, and it was an utter nightmare.
Thank you. The other different theme which the committee's been exploring is the role of GPs, particularly in initial evidence, but then also in providing appeal support. Now, I wanted to ask Mrs McMurtry then a little more about what seems to be a pretty poor experience that you had with your husband's GP, and why. What we've been told is that if GPs are asked for evidence by DWP, or Atos as their agent, that they're contractually required to provide that. But if they're asked by the person, their patient, for an appeal, they can simply refuse, or they can charge because it's outside the contract. So I just wondered if you could expand a little bit about this encounter with your husband's GP.
Well, I went with him, obviously, and we explained that he had had the assessment and that he was fit for work. We went over how he was before the assessment and then subsequent to the assessment, and we said that we needed his support for this, and he was very, very clear that he was of the opinion that my husband had had a medical assessment by a health professional who had submitted evidence that had proven he was fit for work, and that was fact.
What I don't understand is, surely your GP is supposed to provide evidence to inform Atos, not Atos provide evidence to inform your GP.
Well, my husband spoke very little, and I had a good, long, hearty conversation with him about whether tomorrow my husband would be able to go out and work a 40-hour week. Was that his medical opinion? And he eventually came round and said, well, I think, he could maybe manage part-time work. And I said, part-time work? Okay, let's see if we get anywhere with that. And unfortunately, that was the wrong thing to do. I then went to see my own GP because I was feeling the stress of all of this, and spoke to her at great length. And her view was that very understanding of, how I was feeling, but was very careful to say the benefits system, they can't afford the benefits system, the government, and it's people have to be assessed, and if you're assessed as fit, you're fit, and that was the two people in my practice. And that was where we ended up.
Perhaps that's part of the problem we have here. It's not for the GPs to decide whether we can afford a benefit system or not. It's for them to provide
Absolutely.
the evidence by their patients. Okay, thanks very much.
Could I just add one thing about the exact thing with the GPs is that their evidence is still assessed within this very, very rigid framework, which is these criteria that ATOS tick, which the assessors at the DWP go down. And if your GP's written report doesn't fit into that, then they can say you're not fit to. My GP says he's not fit to work, but he goes a walk. You know, as in this was a positive, I make an effort to go out. So now, you know, because I can walk, I can't get employment support. So the GPs don't know.
I think that's a really important point, because I think when you speak to people who have experience representing claimants in the system, they will say sometimes that, yes, even where GPs do provide evidence, the evidence they provide doesn't answer the questions that actually have to be answered. But I think what the committee have identified is a more fundamental problem where some GPs at least simply refuse to provide the evidence altogether, which, you know, is one stage worse.
Yeah, no, just can I give my apologies for being a wee bit late this morning? I'm sorry, particularly to you, Marlene. It's just like everything we hear, it's chaos. You know, before somebody even gets to their assessment, there's the uncertainty as to whether the doctor first supplies something or indeed will, and we keep hearing conflicting evidence from all parties. But I think that I would like that really well tracked, if I can say that, convener, and to the clerks, just this total inconsistency we get from all the different players involved. But what strikes me as really awful is that once you actually get there, and I think, Ian, you referred to it as the tick box, and I just can't begin to imagine the frustration you must feel when the boxes are getting ticked and you're not able to qualify that in any way at all, and then you get a 70-page report that bears no relation to your own situation.
The worrying thing is that the way PIP's going, it's exactly the same, because I have got a copy of the descriptors.
And I think it was early on, and I think you all referred to it, was the added stress that causes. So here we are, if we could let Mr Ian Duncan-Smith know that he's actually making people more ill by the actions that are going on. And again, I think when you said, Ian, that you all have a level of support, be it family, friends, whatever, and professional backgrounds and ability to cope, and terrible things have happened to you. But, you know, for someone on their own who has perhaps always suffered in some way and has never been able to, you know, to hold down a long-term job, the stress of that is absolutely horrendous. And again, I would like you, convener, to put in on record, and perhaps Mr Ian Duncan-Smith, I received an email yesterday from someone contemplating suicide because of welfare reform. So the situation is absolutely horrendous. But back to this, you know, issue of no discretion. I think, Leslie, it was yourself. It was, in fact, you know, you talked about your husband having done voluntary work in the past. No, sorry, Marlene, that was yourself. You're secretary to the MS Society. So there's voluntary work being done here. There's something being given to society by someone who is unable to work. And you were saying, Leslie, that your husband was able before to try a new initiative and something that actually could have affected his well-being and mental health better. But then the way you were treated when there was the potential of part-time work that you thought might have been a way to open the door. So I'm really interested, convener, in knowing that what the situation is in regard to voluntary work, which is a contribution to society, and about part-time work and the ability to ease someone back into work and make the best of the skills they've got. I realise I've just given a bit of a lecture and not really asked you questions. I'm sorry, but your answers were just so powerful as to what we're trying to find out here. Was the part-time work just discounted altogether, Leslie?
I have really no clear picture of this, but I do think if you go into perhaps one of the support groups, there may be some support there. But I have, that's not open. I've not experienced that. All I know is my husband now is not having these. He's not getting any benefit. He's not part of Fife employability anymore. But yeah, it is a cost now to society because he's seeing a psychiatrist. He has his 2 afternoons, and I asked him how long is this to go on, and he said, well, one of them he's finding them very beneficial. He said one I can continue with ad infinitum. The other one I'll go for 8 weeks and then they'll review it and see how I am. I may have to continue with it. And I do find that that's been quite beneficial, but it's also a cost. And I would think that weighing up the cost of him going to hospital 2 afternoons a week compared to what he was getting, where he was coping quite well, doing his wee disco and getting his benefit. I think if you weigh it up, I don't know which one would cost most, but I would rather think that the 2 inpatient days will be.
The other thing, Convener, that's horrified me is the way the medical input that seems to be there, when you turn up. It seems to be very dismissive. And again, we took evidence from Lanarkshire Health Board. I can't remember the name of the organisation. Salus, who are going to be taking over in a slightly different context, but some of that role. And they were very firm in saying that because of their rigorous medical background, that they would be able to be very efficient. I can't remember the words they used, and caring in the way that they did assessments. I wouldn't mind some supplementary stuff from them as a result of some of what we've heard today.
But Salus are not yet operating the PIP system. They're gearing up for it. I think it's June that they start to take that forward. So obviously that's something we'll need to keep an eye on and have them in once they have actually started to implement the system. But yeah, it's something we'll need to be very careful
absolutely, because whilst there's this great feeling of helplessness, if there's anything at all that can be done to make things a wee bit better anywhere, I think we should be pushing for that.
Alex.
So, thank you.
I wondered if I could ask each of you if you have gone through a formal appeal process in relation to a decision that was made after an ATOS assessment.
I'm going through one on Thursday.
And you haven't been through one yet?
Been through one.
Well, but you may be close enough to be able to help. Have either the other been through a formal process?
We can't appeal because we don't have the back of our GP.
Mm-hmm.
That was the advice we were given by the Citizens
It's
Advice.
Particularly the connection with GPs and medical professionals that I'm concerned about.
We can't appeal the decision.
Can I ask Marlene Hepburn, particularly at this moment then, what level or who is assisting you to go through that appeal process?
I have a representative from Macmillan in long-term conditions. He's a benefits advisor. He has been really good. I mean, any time I've had to contact him, see if Ron comes on the phone, my stress level just drops. He will come with me to the assessment. He's my representative. He's appointed. But I got the notification of the appeal before he did, because I phoned him up and said, oh, Ron, I've got a date for my appeal. Well, have you? Oh, I haven't heard. So I had my date, so I phoned him, he penciled it in, he will be there. But he said, he's explained the process that I will go through, and he's been really good. And he says, just explain the situation, Marlene, and then he says, I will come in if there's something that I don't think you've explained or understood fully, maybe a question they've given you. But I think it's the fact that it's a lawyer, an employment lawyer, and a doctor will be the 2 there, and me and Ron.
I wonder if we could make a note of the advisor who's assisting and just make sure that they are included in the process to ensure that there's financial support being directed in their direction. I'm sure there is, but it would be something we should check. You said that there was a doctor and a lawyer involved in the process. Now, the doctor and the lawyer, who is funding them?
I have no idea. Ron has assured me they are totally independent. Totally.
The doctor in particular, I take it this is not your GP?
No, it will not be my GP. It will be a doctor.
Yes.
I don't know who.
Are you aware of how the system has worked and how your own GP or other health professionals, I noticed you mentioned 2 or 3 health professionals who you work with, have they been, to your knowledge, asked to supply evidence for this appeal?
To go for an appeal, I had to submit 2 supporting pieces of evidence. So I contacted my MS nurse and she has written a report, which they have a copy of, and my continence nurse has written a report, again they have a copy.
Yes, but your GP wasn't involved?
GP's not involved.
I wish you the best of luck with that. I think that's very useful to hear your experience. Perhaps it might have been more beneficial if we'd known how it turned out, but it's still very useful to be able to talk to someone who is in the process. Moving on to Mrs McMurchie, you say that we've heard from a number of the comments you've made that you have not had the feedback you might have wanted from your GP.
That's right.
Do you therefore consider that the appeals process is likely to be less useful to you?
The advice that we were given by Citizens Advice up until we had been with them advising us right through filling in the forms and everything was that without our GP providing a detailed report, there was no point in going to appeal because we would still have the evidence of the ATOS assessment and the form that he had filled in. And
surprised at what you've told us today, given that, of course, the role of a GP should be to provide their opinion of your husband's case and not to provide their opinion of somebody else's assessment. Is it possible that maybe possible to explore that further, or do you feel that avenue is completely cut off?
I think now the advice that we've been given is that it's now over 6 months since he claimed, that since he went through the assessment, and we can put in a completely new claim. But I still would have to have my GP. And I think there's some advice to GPs here about what their role is and in these appeals, and also in providing evidence.
A lack of understanding.
Well,
among
both GPs in the same practice. One is saying that we can't afford all this, or no, she can't afford it, but the government can't afford the cost of benefits, and the other one is saying, well, you've been assessed by medical professionals who've said that, so therefore, so there certainly looks as though there is some training that's required by GPs.
Moving on to Mr McGahey, you said in your opening remarks that you have had some success in changing your course through the process, but you haven't been through a formal appeal process. Can I ask what your level of satisfaction with the involvement of health professionals who are responsible for your care was in the process that you've gone through?
I went through the appeals process, I just didn't get to the tribunal. They changed their mind, at the last minute, just before the tribunal was called. Again, I said, I'm a strong character, and with the prospect of, dealing with an appeal, I couldn't cope with it on my own, even with the support of, a very capable wife.
Specifically on the input from health professionals who've been working with your case, do you feel that their input may have had an influence in changing the decisions that were made before you got to the tribunal?
Well, it was amazing. The first 3 inputs, consultant physician, occupational therapist and GP, didn't. They told me, and as I said, that call I got was that, what somebody from the DWP said that, he wouldn't have even put me in the work-related scheme with the input from those 3. And then 2 weeks later, he gets the input from the clinic, from the psychiatrist, and he said he spoke to her completely, and they completely flipped. But I mean, I was going to the tribunal with somebody from Money Matters, South Lanarkshire Money Matters. I think that's the social work department. They were very helpful. My occupational therapist was, you know, she was saying, you know, try and stop me coming to it. And I think there were, you know, there was some other of the medical profession were going to go. I was running a bus trip to my tribunal with the people that were going to be there to support me.
It's come up in evidence before that the importance of having health professionals have an input to this. Do I get the impression that, or would it be fair for me to summarise the impression that we're getting here is that some are good, some are bad, and it can be a bit hit or miss?
The one thing is that, you know, I said the first three were very, very good, but the reports didn't include or weren't based on what the DWP wanted to hear. They were given their informed medical opinion, but it didn't fit into the format that the DWP had established. And that's why it didn't go through. And whatever, you know, my psychiatrist said, you know, obviously did fit into their box.
What we're looking at here is a large number of very clever people who don't communicate very effectively.
Well, I don't think they've been given, you know, the criteria in which they've to base it. You know, they've not been told what information that they're wanted from. They don't know. They submitted what they thought were very comprehensive, very honest reports on my ability, and they were dismissed. They were classed as not relevant by the assessor at the DWP, the decision maker.
Thank you.
Everyone's had a go. I'm going to give you one very small point, Kevin.
Be
No
very-
speech, it's just a very short
No,
question.
I'm going to be very brief,
This has
convener.
been arduous for the witnesses. So
I'm going to be
I'd
very
like
brief
address
because
it.
I think it's information that we actually require and may be helpful to others as well. And that's round about some of the points that Mrs McMurtry made about non-supportive doctor. But her husband is accessing other services where there are other people involved. And I think we need to find out whether a further appeal needs the support of a GP or if other folks involved are relevant to this. Beyond that, convener, I think one of the things which we need to find out is the actual cost of the appeals process, because that's coming to light much more and more. Because you have a doctor, you have a lawyer, you have a clerk and team and all of the rest of it. How much is that actually costing as well? And beyond that, the supporting witnesses that folk require. And I think that is something that we need to dig deeper on as well. But I think the key thing is, in terms of helping Mrs McMurtry and others in the same position whose GPs are not supportive, can they get other medical professionals to back them for an appeal?
That was a useful contribution. I do realise that we've been putting you through quite a lengthy grilling here, and I hope that you didn't find it too stressful. Before we close this part of the meeting, do you want to draw your own conclusions, say something just in finishing that you...
Can I just say that it's had a huge impact on my mental health. I now view my disease in a completely different way. As I say, I worked as a teacher. I got out of teaching because of my MS. I try to keep myself out of the benefit system. I'm keeping myself active. I've just picked up my new car through DLA. I thought, just got in there. But I've just picked that up, and then they're telling me, oh no, you're fit to work. I don't know what the cost of me coming here, the cost of the appeal, which is apparently £3,000 each time. And if I didn't have people to support me, like Ron McIntosh, he's Money Matters Stirling, and honestly, these people are worth their weight in gold, but they are so overwhelmed by this that I worry for people coming behind me. I'm lucky, I've got him. I've seen people in my own local branch that I think, you go through this, you're not going to survive. I'm quite a strong person, but that comes across against me. I'm too independent, I'm too self-sufficient, I live on my own, I look after myself. That was one thing I'm in my comments in my report. I said I do housework. My sister just about fell off the seat at that point because I only do it when she's coming to visit me. And she went, "It's not a big house." And in the report from Atos, Miss Hepburn does housework. Not a big house is in brackets. And I thought, how petty can you be? And that just sums up the whole thing. It's too bureaucratic, it's completely heartless, and as the guy who devised the system said, it's not fit for purpose and people will suffer. I'm suffering.
I'd looked up a quotation about, the, government and civilization, and they say, the moral test of it is how they look after their old and their sick and their young. I'd like to thank everybody here, for, my government here caring, about these matters. I think it's come up in other ones that, we certainly do not get that impression from Westminster. So I'm extremely grateful to each and every one of you, our representatives for caring, about the people that can't look after themselves.
What do you want to?
I think it's a very sick system that has been put in place, and it certainly doesn't have the people at its heart, and it certainly needs to be totally overhauled, reflecting the previous system for us was a much more hearty system, which had patients or claimants at its heart. And I think they maybe have to look back on what they did and what they've put in its place and what the differences are there.
Okay, Bill. Thanks so much to each and every one of you for taking the time to come in and inform us and advise us about your experiences of this system. I mean, what we heard this morning from my perspective was 3 very reasonable people who understood that the system had to exist and that there may have been flaws and cracks in that system. But what you've exposed to us is that the system has now been smashed. And it's not just about the system, and I think what we need to get questions, and we'll review the evidence and we'll discuss what we do in terms of what we heard this morning. But what we have to do is ask questions about what this is doing to individuals, because this is about individuals and not numbers. And what we've heard this morning is 3 people who have made their own effort, they've tried their best to recover from their own circumstances, and it's the system that's put them down. And that should not be the way that the welfare system operates. And I just think, the more we hear from people, the more angry, certainly I'm getting about this. But I also have a great deal of sympathy for those who are having to endure what has been put in place. And as I said, we'll look at the evidence we heard this morning. We'll work on what we have to do to get more information and test exactly what's going on here. But we couldn't have done that without you this morning, so thanks very much to each and every one of you. And at that, I'll close the meeting or suspend for 10 minutes until we come back and finish the meeting.